Israel had a very emotional Saturday, marked by the release of 4 more of our hostages, females, from captivity after 477 days. Meanwhile, the IDF continues its Iron Wall operation in Jenin, located in Judea and Samaria. Security forces have been operating in the heart of the refugee camp for 5 days already and have eliminated 15 terrorists. We'll tell you about the scope of forces in Jenin and the IDF's methods for using special units to find and neutralize the terrorist threats amongst the civilian population. Meanwhile, the terrorist organizations whose prisoners were released as part of this arrangement are celebrating. Israel released 200 security prisoners, including mass murderers who were involved in the killings of soldiers, suicide bombings, and bus bombings against Israelis. Some of the terrorists were expelled to Egypt and Gaza, but some were released into Judea and Samaria, where they were received with festivities and parties. However, some prisoners refused to board the buses to the Gaza Strip and requested to remain inside Israeli prisons instead of going back to their homes in Gaza. In a related development, Hamas did not release Arbel Yahud, who was supposed to be part of Saturday's exchange. This violation of the arrangement meant that the IDF will not allow Gazan residents to travel to the northern part of the Gaza Strip until Arbel Yahud is freed. The IDF Arabic spokesperson has warned Gazans not to approach the Netzarim corridor, and the IDF fired warning shots at armed men who tried to approach that area. At this stage of the deal, Hamas is supposed to hand over information on the condition of the remaining hostages from the first stage of the deal. If they do not, that is another violation of the agreement. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will also give us a look at what is happening in Lebanon, where the big question is whether the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah will hold or collapse. The IDF was supposed to pull out of Lebanon tomorrow, in line with the ceasefire understandings, but it is still requesting to be allowed to stay longer because there is more work that is needed to be done there. The assessment is that Hezbollah will not resume rocket fire into Israel because of this. The northern border has reverted to being a powder keg, as intelligence assessments state that it might be impossible to completely withdraw from all of southern Lebanon. Everywhere, the question arises, who will stop Hezbollah from returning to the border? Further afield, the downfall of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is in sight, and there are questions about who will rule that country next. However, even as we keep all this in mind, here in Israel, we're basking in the glow of our joy because for 4 families, the nightmare is over, as Liri Elbag, Karina Arayev, Daniela Gilboa, and Naama Levi have returned home. We'll bring you the moving moments and also the chilling ones from Hamas's cynical video as they release these hostages. Since the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel went into effect, Hamas has worked hard to show it is still in control, but the hostages have also demonstrated resilience and courage in the face of these attempts to humiliate them. Finally, the White House has accelerated the supply of heavy bombs and other equipment to the IDF. This is part of a new policy by the incoming Trump administration, and in Israel, there is great relief and renewed determination to finish the job. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report on what is happening in Israel on day 478 of the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, all armed groups in Judea and Samaria. All of them are taking their orders from the Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click that subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another opportunity to help us spread the truth and, of course, never miss an episode of Boots on the Ground. I also want to tell you about our sponsor for today's video, Vinia Dietary Supplements. These small capsules can make a big difference in your overall health and well-being. I use them myself, and I encourage you to try them as well. We'll tell you more about them later in the report, but first, the news. Before we move on to what happened yesterday, I want to send my congratulations to Liri Elbag, Karina Arayev, Daniela Gilboa, and Nama Levi, who have returned home. I'm sending love and blessings to you and your family. We've been waiting to see you. But before we go to the report on how the release was carried out, I want to start with what happened last night in Judea and Samaria. Security forces continue operating in the heart of the Jenin refugee camp as part of Operation Iron Wall, which began last Tuesday, and during the operation, they have already eliminated 15 terrorists and arrested more than 35 others. The IDF spokesperson's unit stated that during the operation, the forces fired at terrorists barricaded in a building and added, "It is known that there is a claim about non-involved individuals being harmed by the gunfire, and the incident is under investigation by the IDF. IDF forces surrounded the building based on intelligence that a wanted terrorist was holed up inside. The forces began applying pressure cooker tactics on the building, called on its occupants to evacuate, and even threw stun grenades inside, but no one came out of the building." The Quds network later reported that a vehicle was attacked from the air near the El Ansar Mosque in the Jenin refugee camp. According to the report, there were no casualties in that incident. Security forces operating in the refugee camp are also searching houses to locate weapons, explosive labs, and terrorists' command centers. During the activity, more than 40 terrorists were wounded, and the forces destroyed large quantities of improvised explosive devices and other weapons. In addition, more than 35 terrorists were taken for questioning by the Shin Bet and the IDF, and many other suspects were questioned on the ground by intelligence personnel. The forces' method of action in the refugee camp is effectively to put pressure on the terrorists to flush them out of hiding and then pursue them after they begin to move out in the open. There are special units with training and equipment to carry out these missions, including Duvdevan and Egoz, which are special forces units in the IDF. They are supported by air units, drones, and cameras. In parallel with this operation, amidst the release of Palestinian prisoners as part of the hostage deal with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Central Command is focusing on preventing celebrations by terrorists throughout Judea and Samaria, and especially in the Jenin area. This week, the IDF is expected to continue the operation, clearing the refugee camp of various weapons. It is important to point out that the IDF operation in Jenin followed a period in which the Palestinian Authority police attempted to reassert control over the area and were unable to overcome the heavily armed terrorist groups and criminal gangs in the city. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue reporting on the operation in the hottest sector in Israel. And now we will move on to the release of our female hostages and also the release of terrorists from Israeli prisons on Saturday. But 1 second before we do that, I will ask you to please keep spreading the truth, share our videos on YouTube, and follow us on social media. Most importantly, take a second and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. We all watched yesterday with excitement and joy on Saturday as the 4 female observers who were kidnapped on October 7th, Liri Elbag, Karina Arayev, Daniela Gilboa, and Nama Levi, returned to Israel as part of the second phase of the first part of the ceasefire agreement. However, Hamas has not yet submitted the full list of hostages to be released, including their medical conditions. Talks are underway for the release of Arbel Yahoud, with Hamas claiming, "We've given a sign of life to the mediators." Netanyahu's office said they have not received any sign of life from her and threatened not to allow Gazans displaced persons to return to the northern part of the Gaza Strip until she is released. Elsewhere, an NBC report stated, Keith Siegel will be released next Saturday, but that is in the future, and for now, we need to take a closer look at events over the past 24 hours. Hamas planned the release of our hostages to be a spectacle of humiliation, but the hostages bravely refused to cooperate with this agenda and instead gave the whole world an example of courage in the face of evil. Liri Elbag was photographed at the moment of her release with a wide smile on her face, surrounded by Hamas terrorists with covered faces. The photo taken next to the Red Cross vehicle in Gaza tells the story of the Israeli spirit's victory. While the terrorists are covered and hidden with green sashes, Liri stands tall and wears a proud smile. We have also found out some things about the last few days they were in captivity, including that they were held together for many days, but recently Agam was separated from the others, which was very difficult for everyone. The force said that in the first days of captivity, there was an older person with them who guarded them, looking after the food and showers. It was also reported that Hamas terrorists moved them from place to place, even within Gaza City, while pretending they were Palestinian women. Even though they returned in good physical condition, the terrorists treated them in a humiliating and harsh way and called them the soldiers. Despite Israel's insistence throughout the week, Arbel Yaoud from Nir Oz, who according to intelligence estimates is held by a Salafist group linked to the Islamic Jihad in Khan Yunis, was not included in the list of the 4 hostages scheduled for release that was published on Friday and released on Saturday. After Yaoud's name was not included, Israel is left with several options for how to respond to what Jerusalem defines as concern that Hamas is not meeting the terms of the agreement. However, an Al Jazeera source, quoting a Hamas source, said, "We informed the mediators that Arbel Yaoud is alive and will be released next Saturday." Israel's assessment is that Arbel is held by a Salafist terrorist organization with which Hamas has not yet concluded negotiations on her release, but even so, it constitutes a violation of the agreement, which requires Hamas to bring all the hostages regardless of which organization is holding them. In any case, immediately after the release of the 4 hostages, the Prime Minister of Israel published a statement saying, "Today, Israel received 4 female soldiers who were held captive by the Hamas terrorist organization and in return will release security prisoners according to the set criteria. In accordance with the agreement, Israel will not allow Gazans to move to the northern part of the Gaza Strip until the release of the civilian Arbel Yaoud, who was supposed to be released today." Despite the Prime Minister's announcement, Israel is considering that if guarantees come from the mediators that Arbel will be released soon, they may open the Netzarim route for northward passage despite the violation of the agreement. If they do open the corridor to northern Gaza, it may be irreversible, because if Hamas really is lying, it would be difficult to close the route and stop the flood of returnees northward. Hamas is also supposed to provide a list of the status of the remaining 26 hostages held in Gaza, along other things, and Israel will know for the first time officially what happened to the Bibas family members. Israel has already prepared to apply pressure to Hamas if it tries to play with the lists. On that subject, another statement by the IDF spokesperson's office added that Hamas did not fulfill the agreement to return civilians first. "We are committed to bringing back Shiri Bibas and the children Ariel and Kfir." Amidst all these diplomatic signals and maneuvers, Israelis are rejoicing over the release of 4 more hostages, while various terror organizations are celebrating the release of their own prisoners from Israeli jails. 200 more were released on Saturday, including 121 who had been serving life sentences in Israeli prisons. Among those welcoming the terrorists were some who waved Hamas flags, but these were confiscated by the Palestinian Authority Security Service, at least according to the families of some terrorists. According to reports in Ramallah, crowds carried the prisoners on their shoulders, waving victory signs and expressing gratitude and appreciation to Hamas, which they call the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority police made efforts to confiscate Hamas flags and otherwise keep the demonstrations from getting out of hand, and this is according to witnesses. Meanwhile, the IDF Central Command efforts are focused on preventing terrorist celebrations and organizing as orderly as possible the release of the terrorist prisoners to the villages and cities in Judea and Samaria. However, there is only so much that the IDF or the Palestinian Authority police can do, and large celebrations accompanied by demonstrations of support for Hamas have been seen in many of these villages on Saturday. That included the Akab village in the area of eastern Jerusalem. While no celebrations have begun yet in Egypt, where 70 of the terrorists who were released yesterday were expelled, a Hamas delegation arrived in the country to hold a ceremony. Several countries such as Iran, Turkey, Qatar, and Algeria have also opened their doors to the freed terrorists. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on any development regarding the hostage deal. And next Saturday, we will provide another update on the situation with the hostages. So keep tuned to the truth and subscribe to TBN Israel. Before we continue, let's take a moment to appreciate the good news we received this week and pray for more in the week ahead. Let's start the new week with a boost of hope and resilience. I want to recommend a supplement that has truly helped me feel ready for whatever comes next. This past year, during my reserve service, I felt the need to stay sharp and ready at all times, both emotionally and physically. Praying every day gave me the strength to push forward, but I also found a practical boost in Vinia, an incredible Israeli innovation made from red grape cells. Vinia improves blood flow to your heart, brain, and muscles, helping you feel more energetic, focused, and prepared for the day. It's a natural way to support your body without the sugar or alcohol found in grapes. What's even better is that Vinia isn't just in a capsule. You can also enjoy it as coffee or tea each morning for a fresh, healthy start of your day. I used it daily during my service, and I still do. If you want to experience the difference for yourself, visit www.vinia.tbnisrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Trust me, you won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the news. We now switch our focus to events on Israel's northern border. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will take us through what is going on with the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah and how it affects our neighborhood, the Middle East. Over to you, Mati.
Thank you, Yael. The first stage of the ceasefire with Hezbollah is coming to an end after the initial 60-day period, and today the IDF is supposed to be fully withdrawn from Lebanese territory. However, even before the ceasefire began, everyone knew that the weak point in the entire plan was the Lebanese National Army, which is supposed to be moving into the area between the Litani River and the Israeli border to prevent Hezbollah from redeploying exactly where Israel occupied that land. And despite the guidance and support from an international monitoring mechanism led by the United States and France, the Lebanese National Army has not been able to carry out their part in this plan so far. In addition to this, during these 60 days of stabilization, many changes occurred that will certainly affect the transition to the permanent ceasefire stage and the implementation of all the components and principles of the agreement. For the first time in several years, Lebanon was able to elect a new president, who not coincidentally had been the Lebanese army commander when the war was still in its height and the agreement was being formulated. And meanwhile, President Donald Trump returned to the White House a week ago and did not hide his intentions to end the ongoing wars and bring peace to the region and the world. And although progress is uneven, there have been some serious moves made this direction just in the first week of his new administration. In the Gaza Strip, they're entering the second week of implementing the hostage release outline, and a ceasefire is holding, giving hope for a long-term end to the fighting. And elsewhere in Syria, the Assad regime fell and rebel groups seized power, although the situation in that country is highly unstable and renewed fighting could break out very quickly and very easily. In Israel, we're entering into a transition stage with the Chief of Staff's resignation, which will take effect in early March. Several other senior officers have also resigned, and they will have to be replaced. This is a delicate moment when we might be facing renewed fighting in the north, and so it is imperative that this transition happens as quickly and smoothly as possible. On that note, Israel rightly has from day one of the ceasefire in Lebanon insisted on full and uncompromising implementation of the principles, including an offensive response to any violation by Hezbollah. This includes aggressive acts by terrorists in the southern Lebanon area or attempts to smuggle weapons from the Syria-Lebanon border, while only withdrawing IDF forces after the Lebanese army enters the territory. The Lebanese National Army has moved very slowly until recently, and the 60-day mark for this initial ceasefire state was never meant to be a sacred date. About a month ago, initial declarations and statements by the Defense Minister, the Chief of Staff, and others stated that Israel does not intend to withdraw its forces from Lebanon at the agreed timing. This past week, the voices grew louder, and even some new dates for withdrawal began to surface. The exact timing is not the main issue. The main issue, of course, is whether or not the conditions will exist that will make it possible for Israel to withdraw and be secure on our northern border have not yet been met. In that context, it is important to recall that Israel was very concerned that the incoming Trump administration would force Israel to withdraw. But in practice, in the first major test of Israel-US relations, the US directly supported Israel's decision not to withdraw all its forces from Lebanon at the end of the 60-day ceasefire. This is because Israel has explained that the cabinet's decision not to withdraw at this point because Hezbollah is not meeting the terms of the ceasefire. It was also pointed out that Hezbollah forces are still south of the Litani, and that the Lebanese army has not yet deployed according to the agreement. A statement from the Prime Minister's office added that the State of Israel will not endanger its communities and citizens and will insist on fully achieving the objectives of fighting in the north to the safe return of the residents to their homes. The agreement's implementation is progressing, the exit from the area is being done gradually, and in some sectors it has been delayed and will take a little longer in order to bring about a gradual withdrawal of the IDF and the deployment of the Lebanese army, without allowing Hezbollah to return and redeploy in the area. The IDF Arabic spokesperson added in a message directed to the residents of southern Lebanon that they should not allow Hezbollah to use them as human shields. He also asked them to be patient for a little longer and that there would be soon an announcement that it is safe for them to return to their homes. Until then, wait, the statement said. Don't let Hezbollah come back and use you to cover up the destructive consequences of the irresponsible decisions it made at the expense of the state of Lebanon. Israel has evidence that Hezbollah is not evacuating, although it is not attacking the Lebanese army. Its very presence in the field violates the agreement. The Lebanese army very much dislikes confronting Hezbollah and is not prepared to take such risks. On that note, I believe the Lebanese army will eventually take the positions agreed upon in the deal and will not allow an armed Hezbollah presence or weapons depots in the border areas. Everything will be okay, but after the IDF withdraws, the question arises, who will stop Hezbollah from returning? Obviously, there should be an end to Hezbollah's presence in the area. Any violation of the agreement must be answered with fire. Otherwise, the residents of northern Israel cannot return home. Thank you for staying with TBN Israel as we explore these issues. I want to invite you to share this content with other people you know who are looking for a reliable news source, and click the subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you never miss an episode of Boots on the Ground. That's it for me, Yael. Now back to you.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani. But 1 second before we let you go, can you give us an update on the American release of weapons shipments to the IDF, including heavy bombs?
Certainly, Yael. The White House has fast-tracked deliveries of 2,000-pound heavy bombs and the D9 bulldozers for the IDF. This means that the shipment, which the Biden administration delayed for fear of how Israel would use these bombs in population centers, will now arrive in the very near future. President Donald Trump wrote on his social media account, Truth Social, that many things that were ordered and paid for by Israel but not shipped by Biden are now on their way. That's good news for us. The critical shipment that has now been released includes, among other items, 1,700 heavy bombs for the Air Force from Boeing, along with 134 Caterpillar D9 bulldozers and additional weaponry. We note that the IDF was already preparing in advance for the release of this shipment, ahead of President Trump's entry into the White House. The shipment of these bombs and the bulldozers had been delayed by the Biden administration due to the heavy internal pressure inside the U.S. State Department, as well as protests by students on university campuses. The Biden administration caved to this pressure, much of which was coming from the electoral base of the Democratic Party. The new Trump administration has already shown they're not vulnerable to such pressures and will move swiftly to support Israel in the battle against the enemies of both Israel and America. So let's say thank you and amen. And now, back to you, Yael.
One moment before we return to Hamas's attempts yesterday to wage psychological warfare on the Israeli citizens and try to change the narrative and reality, I'd like to ask you to support us. We at TBN Israel work day and night to bring you the truth. And if you would like to receive more videos and help our work, please click that donate button on YouTube or visit our website tbnisrael.com/give to support our work. Every dollar is reinvested into spreading the truth. Now, for a moment, we need to revisit the events of Saturday, especially the theatrics that Hamas is presenting to the world surrounding the release of these hostages. This is an absurd and foolish show of force by the terrorist organization, which desperately tries to create an image of victory after it was humiliated and defeated, and its entire Hamas leadership was wiped out by the IDF. This is the second time in a week that Hamas has used the handover hostages to the Red Cross to present the image of a ruling force in the Gaza Strip, despite 15 months of war that killed thousands of its fighters and reduced cities to rubble. The handover of 4 female hostages today was an even more dramatic spectacle than last Sunday's release of the other 3 female hostages. Hamas set up a stage in Palestine Square in the center of Gaza City. This is an area that was destroyed by the Israeli bombardment and the ground incursion. The stage bore a sign in Hebrew saying, "Zionism will not win," and hundreds of armed masked fighters and civilians gathered nearby. On the stage, Hamas held a ceremony of signing between one of its representatives and the Red Cross representative, who then received the hostages. The hostages arrived in the square in a convoy of medium-sized SUVs. They were brought onto the stage wearing combat uniforms, seemingly to highlight that they were soldiers and not civilians. Hamas members with expensive cameras followed the hostages, like preparing a video to share on social media. On the stage, the hostages smiled and waved to the crowd, shouting slogans, while Hamas gunmen stood next to them. The Red Cross announced that it will not respond to these actions. I must remark, our brave hostages are simply lionesses. They're heroes. They stood tall and smiled in front of masked men with guns who were shouting for murder and the annihilation of Jews. But the spirit of our female soldiers did not falter, and they humiliated Hamas. According to a New York Times report, Israeli sources claimed that Hamas forced the hostages to smile and wave as part of a propaganda effort to convey that the terrorist organization treats prisoners well. However, it should be noted that former hostages reported abuse, including public accounts of sexual assaults and torture. Since the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel came into effect last Sunday, Hamas has been working hard to demonstrate that it is still in control of Gaza, with fighters marching through city centers and police stationed at intersections. It is unclear how many fighters, police, and political leaders survived the war, but by publicly staging the handovers of hostages in this manner, Hamas is making it clear that it is still controlling parts of the Gaza Strip that endured these attacks. I say, let them enjoy their moment of appearing to still be in control while enjoying the support of some university students around the world, and in the West, and some governments. The world will quickly move on, especially after the hostages will be released. And in my opinion, no one ever gets away with anything. And these terrorists should remember that. In the meantime, please continue to pray for our hostages who are held in Gaza. Share and spread the truth about what is happening in Israel. The most important thing that you can do is unite in prayer. So pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the IDF soldiers wherever they are fighting, in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Judea and Samaria, or in Syria. And most importantly, unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. And together we will win this war because God is on our side.